Exercise physiology is the study of our responses and adaptations to exercise. And when we talk about our responses, we're looking at our acute bodily reaction. So at the onset and in sustained and immediately following a bout of exercise. The study of the responses are looking more at the chronic long-term changes that take place as our body attempts to get better and make our systems more efficient. Now, when you look at our exercise physiology, which is ENS 304, the way that they organize the course topics is great. They break it into the basic body systems, just like the regular basic physiology class, and then specifically, again, look at the responses and adaptations for each of those systems. For instance, the thermoregulatory system. You'll go through all of the ways that our sweat glands adapt and the way they immediately act to dissipate heat during exercise. You'll also learn about neuromuscular responses, the way that action potential is generated and the way our muscles contract, all the way to the way our muscles grow and become stronger and more powerful. We'll also learn in exercise physiology about the metabolic responses and adaptations. What energy systems are fueling the muscles, what happens during the recovery period, and what changes take place in the cell to get better at supplying the muscle energy during exercise. We also look at cardiorespiratory responses and adaptations, what happens to your heart and lungs and blood vessels right during exercise, and what are the long-term beneficial adaptations in those systems, again, to be better physical specimens. And then the endocrine system. And this system is actually intricately, I'm like combining intimately and endocrine. The endocrine system is directly involved in all of the responses because all of these systems are controlled by endocrine hormones. Hormones are what are kind of, obviously the brain is controlling the release of those hormones, but hormones are the brain's communicator. They're like its gopher, for to say. They tell all the organs in these responses what to do. Now, before we move on and talk about the sample lesson, which is looking at a response and adaptation in each of these systems. Actually, I don't think I went through each of them. I think I narrowed it down to neuromuscular, metabolic, and cardiorespiratory. We're going to look at the responses and adaptations in each of those three systems. But before we do that, I just wanted to highlight in surveying you guys, it looks like exercise physiology is a it's a very popular topic. And so if I look at the responses among the subdisciplines, which again, this whole unit is about the different subdisciplines, and we are looking at the courses you're taking, but the subdisciplines of exercise science. And among those, we've got biomechanics and exercise psychology. It looks like exercise physiology is really the most popular by pretty much far. Also, on the topic of exercise physiology, you can take this class on a full semester abroad. They have it available at several institutions in Australia, and I'm not sure if you're aware, but Australia is a premier place of exercise science. They have really nice lab facilities, a lot of good reports from students who have studied abroad and taken exercise physiology. They have equivalent courses that come back and that would clear your ENS 304, which is what that is here at State. It would clear your ENS 304. There are also plenty of lab options so that you could also clear the lab as well. New Zealand, and I'm not sure if you're probably like, what is the feather there? This is actually the logo for the Pro Rugby Association in New Zealand, but they also have a really good exercise physiology program and lots of good student feedback on the learning outcomes of that trip. So anyway, back to the sample lesson on responses to exercise. And we're going to kind of look at it first we'll look at responses in a few systems, and then we'll look at adaptations. So right at the onset, of course, I have an animation issue. I hate when little things like that happen, but I'm not going to restart. Right at the onset, and we have visited this before, the brain sends downward action potential, which is an electrical signal. I'm just going to go ahead and populate all of those. The electrical signal is sent down through a motor unit, and those motor units innervate each individual little fiber, which are like muscle cells, and they send that electric signal, and that electric signal triggers basically a big chemical reaction that causes, now we're on this little second one, that causes troponin. I'll give you the name of the chemical. I would never ask you these details. We're looking at the exercise responses and adaptations. I'm giving you those details, but the details aren't what's important. So keep that in mind. Troponin binds up here to the actin. And by the way, actin and myosin are proteins, and they look kind of like this. They're proteins inside each muscle fiber. So what the chemical response does here, the neurotransmitters that are released, is it causes this troponin to bind up here to the actin, contracting, it physically moves something out of the way so that myosin can come up, bind, hook, and pull. And this is a very slow GIF right here. There we go. But you can see that that makes the sarcomere shorten, which is what our muscles do when they generate power. They shorten. So this is the basic neuromuscular response. And you have this on your slide, which is summarizing the same thing. You've got that neuroelectrical chemical signal. It goes to make the proteins within each fiber bind, and that makes them hook and pull and shorten, which generates force. Now, that is the response to exercise, right? We go to do something that's different than at rest, and this is what our muscles do. Now, the first thing that happens, so now we're looking at metabolic systems, looking at the responses and metabolism. Now, this should look familiar to you also because we've briefly talked about the 3 energy systems, and what these are implying are who is supplying the muscle its ATP. So ATP is like a recyclable battery in each muscle cell, and there's actually tons of them. There's millions of little recyclable batteries in those cells, and they have to constantly be being charged. So there are 3 energy systems in the cell that are responsible for charging ATP in the cell continuously, and obviously at a much more accelerated pace as it contracts to keep up with exercise. So at the very onset, you can see that 2 systems are really in charge here first of all, I'll stop and say that all 3 of these systems kind of work in unison. So there's always going to be a little bit of aerobic metabolism and anaerobic metabolism going on in the body at all times. Okay. So sometimes these figures make it seem like these are all or nothing situations, but it's a schematic, which means that we're looking at the onset of exercise, how in the first few seconds, you have stored ATP. These are stored phosphenogens. There's 2 phosphenogen systems, creatine phosphate and just a little bit of stored ATP that was just kind of sitting there ready. So right at the onset of exercise, that stored ATP depletes immediately, and creatine is phosphorylated and dephosphorylated immediately. This lasts no more than it depends on the intensity of the contraction. If you're lifting as heavy as you can, it lasts just seconds. And if you're doing something at like a 70 or 80% of your capacity, it might last 15 or 20. And sometimes even 30, but not long is the point. It's a very short energy system for lots of power. And again, I wanted to show you a little bit of a close-up, just a tiny bit of the breakdown of the chemistry of the process for creatine phosphate being broken down, because it kind of goes back to the idea of creatine supplements, where yes, sometimes they've been purported to increase strength, maybe even muscle voluminousness or size, but a lot of that isn't necessarily created to its ability to create more phosphorylated creatine, because creatine, when you take it in a supplement, exists just like this on its own. But it still needs to be turned into the energy storing compound phosphorylated creatine. And that's where there is just a little bit of skepticism in the effectiveness of that as a supplement. Doesn't mean that you're going to necessarily regenerate PCR faster. But so in the first few seconds of exercise, that is our metabolic response. Now, as exercise continues beyond that first few seconds, and as those systems quickly deplete, the anaerobic system is picking up speed. Now, this system we use in a very low amount because it produces hydrogen ions that start to sting when they accumulate. But right at the onset of exercise, we've got some stored glucose right available. We're all good to run that system. In fact, it's called the buffering system because it holds us over until the cardiovascular system can deliver us the oxygen that we need. So those go on without any oxygen, but they don't last either because, like I just mentioned, they create a nasty metabolic byproduct. And they're also very inefficient when it comes to making energy, this anaerobic system. So what happens though is because the body immediately senses this debt in oxygen, because now we're using some energy inside the cell that isn't proportional to what we're breathing in. So the body goes, uh-oh, and it immediately stimulates the reaction that we'll talk about on the next slide. But introducing it here, it sends out a fast, rapid signal to the kidney, the adrenal hormones, or the adrenal glands, I should say, which sit right on top of the kidney, and those secrete adrenal hormones, specifically epinephrine, norepinephrine, catecholamines, and all of those things that make our heart rate adjust. So again, right at the onset, we're using that anaerobic system. We're burning local glucose. We're creating an oxygen deficit or imbalance. The body senses that immediately and tells the kidneys to secrete out those adrenal hormones, aka adrenaline. At the exact same time, pancreatic hormones are being released to go, oh man, we got to send out some glucagon. We got to have those cells start breaking down what they have stored. Because right now the muscle has lots of glucagon stored, but that's in like a compact form. It doesn't have tons of free glucose that it's ready to use right away. So the hormones and glucagon are secreted from the pancreas. So you've got the adrenal hormones, pancreatic hormone, glucagon, just firing to the cells to get there quickly to help them metabolically. I know that was a lot. But then the last thing, and this will all tie in when we look at our adaptations, is after those first couple minutes, maybe one, depending on intensity, 1 to 2 minutes, those systems are definitely depleting in their ability to buffer. And so the aerobic systems by then are kicking in. And this also is a nice lead to the next slide, because this system cannot kick in until our cardiorespiratory system does its job. The only thing it needs is oxygen, and there's just not enough in the cell naturally right at the onset of exercise. So the cardiorespiratory system kicks in, which is on the next slide, but it enables us to take fatty acids and break them down from fat. And that goes back here to these adrenal hormones. These adrenal hormones, or catecholamines, they tell the fat, hey dude, start letting go. And so does glucagon. Hey fat, start letting go of the fatty acids, give it up. And then those can be starting directed to go to the muscle where they're needed to make energy. So that is the metabolic response at the onset of exercise. You've got these stored phosphinogen systems. They don't last long. Then you've got your anaerobic systems that buffer until the aerobic systems can kick in and start taking over. And by the way, I know I didn't have anything else on the timeline, but this aerobic system can go for hours and hours, right? It just plateaus off, or steady state. Now, the cardiorespiratory system, as we mentioned, it released that adrenal hormone, or adrenaline, and that hormone acts on our cardiorespiratory system. So at the same time, in unison, the heart starts beating faster and harder and filling more with blood. And one beat of the heart is known as systole. So you're looking in this GIF at one cycle of systole. This cycle starts to just go faster. And what's interesting though is after people get better at exercise and their heart gets stronger, which I'm getting ahead to the adaptation, but it actually goes slower because it gives the heart more time to fill up, creating one more big powerful contraction. Now that doesn't happen at first. At first, our heart rate just goes super fast when we're not that fit because it's just doing its best to get the oxygen to the muscles. But eventually, again, this response isn't as rapid as we train. So at the same time, another muscle that just, poor little guy, goes unnoticed so often, but I think it's actually funny. I would love to coin this term, and I did in this new textbook I'm working on, but cardiomuscular fitness. And I haven't heard, people love to talk about muscular fitness, but we think of our large muscle groups like our glutes and our quads and our biceps. But what about the little muscles? What about the little ones, the cardiomuscular system? So the diaphragm, just like the heart, which is also a muscle, it gets bigger and stronger. So at the onset of, again, I'm getting ahead of myself, but I don't know if I come back to that. So the diaphragm sits at the base of the lungs and it pulls down, creates a reverse pressure system that causes you to gasp in air. And so at the same time that the heart is going faster, the diaphragm is also going faster and pulling down more forcefully so that you're pulling in larger draws of breath, your ventilatory rate. Now, this is a very important image and one of the basics of exercise physiology, because heart rate and VO2, or oxygen intake, is very much proportional, meaning they are happening very synchronously. And I love that relationship because you can measure it in a lab and it's just tried and true. The heart rate goes up at the same rate as the ventilation. So somehow the diaphragm and the heart are super connected electrically to do that at the exact same pace. Now, one other couple notes here on the cardiorespiratory response is that you will also, in your exercise physiology lab, ENS 304, you will also measure your VO2. And VO2 stands for volume of oxygen consumed. That makes sense. And we do this by putting a bag apparatus. It's called the Douglas bag on your face. And we trap all the air, and then we're able to use it in a machine that analyzes the gases. So an average adult, will have a 30 to 50 oxygen kilogram per, I don't need to say the unit, but we'll be able to look at yours and see where it fits. And you can kind of look at what percentile ranking you're in compared to classmates. If you're chosen to be a subject, or I guess if you volunteer. One last thing about, again, cardiomuscular system is that we see a vasoconstriction of blood vessels right at the onset of exercise, so that everything in the gut and splanchnic regions like the liver and the spleen all those vessels start to tighten up, and all of the ones in the muscles obviously dilate. So they vasodilate, and the ones in the phalangic region vasoconstrict. That's a very important aspect of the onset of exercise also, and especially steady state exercise, because it explains why, eating during exercise isn't that great of an idea, because there's no blood going to your GI system at that time. So now we look at adaptations. So those were the responses, like right at the onset of exercise, as we're exercising, etc. These are the long-term beneficial changes that our body does to, again, be a better physical, it's survival. I'm able to survive because I can do this better. So we'll keep in the same order, looking at the systems, but I want to first take you back to a familiar slide. It was a sample lesson from molecular biology, and it ties right in to everything you need to know about what happens after exercise to make you adapt over the hours and days and months following exercise. And it all goes back to this concept of proteogenesis, or protein synthesis. So when you subject your body to that stress and damage, and it repairs and compensates by being better, whether it's flexibility, cardiorespiratory, or strength, that all happens through the synthesis of more proteins, okay? So our body immediately in response creates more proteins, and that happens through this, again, very genetically driven, but also injury and stress driven process where amino acids are turned into whole proteins. Now, what in the heck are we using these proteins for? Now, we all kind of understand the concept of muscle cells. We know those are protein because we've just had that ingrained in us for so long. But like I just said, every single thing, that every adaptation boils down to making proteins. And so if we look at what a cell is, every single cell in the body is about 16% protein by weight. And you're probably like, well, that's not a lot. She's emphasizing this a lot. But if you consider that about 65 to 75% of the cell, let's just say 70%, that's probably a safe guesstimate, an educated guesstimate. About 70% of the cell weight is water. So now you're thinking, okay, well, of the solids in the cell, and considering the cell membrane is made of fat, we're talking a very important part of our chemical makeup is protein. And so after exercise, proteogenesis happens to make us adapt or get better, and a bunch of different things are formed. And we'll look at a lot of these on the next couple slides, but things like membrane pumps, receptors, specifically fibrous and globular proteins. And when we talk about globular proteins, we make more hormones, we make more carriers, and we'll look at one of these. We make more enzymes. When it comes to fibrous proteins, we make more connective tissue, not only in our skin, which I wrote here, but also things that keep our joints together and keep all of our skeleton held together, connective tissues. But also we know about this one again, but we make more actin and myosin. Those are these two little proteins that hook and pull to make the muscle shorten. So let's look at this specifically for actin and myosin, because we're looking at neuromuscular adaptations. Now, I'm not going to go into the details on this slide because I plan to, but this is only one class out of lots. So I'm going to just briefly say that inside the cell, the muscle cells, because we could do this inside collagen cells, which is a type of connective tissue. We could do this inside of a fat cell for the enzyme changes that happen. But we're looking inside of a muscle cell and how actin and myosin specifically are made. And that process is called muscle protein synthesis. And the pathway in which that happens is called mTOR. And the amino acid that stimulates that process is called leucine. And we're going to talk more about leucine, especially when we do a little sample research study. Not that we're going to do a study. I'm going to teach you how to find articles related to a study and design a study based on leucine, and looking at vegan diets and is it adequate in leucine, and can a leucine supplemented diet be as good for stimulating muscle protein synthesis? I know you're probably looking a lot at this and wondering what this is, and I'm so torn whether I should go into it or not. But I think I'll save it. Just keep an eye on, there's a lot of supplements taken for stimulating muscle protein synthesis, and we'll revisit this. So adaptations. So we just looked at, after exercise, we make more proteins. In the muscle cell, that results in more actin and myosin. Now, on a neuromuscular level, what this looks like, what we see, what we measure is hypertrophy. The muscle got bigger. Or hyperplasia, it increased in its cross density. There's more muscle fibers per surface area. So these are the two types of ways that the muscle grows from that stress and injury. Now, interestingly though, and this is a topic that I think will probably interest you later as you get into exercise programming and understanding why people do lighter or heavier reps. This is a good leadway into that. So hypertrophy, where the muscle fibers get bigger, can happen based on real fibrillar hypertrophy, which is this one. And this is where there's actually more actin and myosin being made, more fibers, more fibrillar proteins, more actin and myosin. There's also the kind where cells just get better at taking in more sarcoplasmic water, basically. Sarcoplasmic fluid is like our cytoplasm of the muscle cell. It's the water component. So you have two kinds of hypertrophy: the kind that just takes in more water and the kind where more muscle fibers are actually being developed. Both make your muscle look bigger. Both create hypertrophy. However, one of these is helpful for power and one of them hurts power. And I wish we were in a live setting so I could ask you what you think. But yes, if you are, I'll just give you a second pause, pretend we're pausing. I can't even do it when I'm recording, but the sarcoplasmic type of hypertrophy actually impairs strength because there is just not enough surface density for the actin and myosin to create that force when it hooks and binds. Whereas the density here in the actin and myosin creates more force. So bodybuilders, right? You take a bodybuilder, they are not interested in being able to create force and power because that's not the nature of their competition. So they train for sarcoplasmic hypertrophy because even though it's not that powerful, it's big and it creates definition. Whereas your power people, your Olympic lifters, people that are judged on the merit of the strength they lift, they never try to gain sarcoplasmic build. They try to actually have myofibrillar build. And those are two different types of lifting. And I won't go into the details even though I want to because it is a sample lesson on our exercise responses and adaptations. And here we're looking at the muscular adaptations, particularly hypertrophy. So we also have adaptations metabolically. And metabolically, we adapt mostly by the changing in our mitochondrial potential. And if I didn't mention it already, if I went back to the slide on metabolism, aerobic energy, and again, what sustains several minutes to hours of exercise is done in the mitochondria. That is where that energy system takes place. And there are several mitochondria in all of our cells to do that all the time. But as we train, our mitochondria get greater in number, they get denser, they get longer, and they also have more cristae, which are the things where the process happens, respiration happens. And so very interestingly, as we train, our mitochondria get, again, denser, just bigger, more number, longer, more density. But you can see that as they increase with training, they immediately decrease with detraining. And in fact, I mean, at a more accelerated pace that they were gained. And they're also gained quickly with retraining. This is a good time to point out for, dude, a public health promotion moment. If I had a little sweet music behind me, the body is plastic, you guys. It is never too late to start exercise. It is never a bad idea to stop because for a reason that's good, because you can always maintain your health and status of fitness again. And when you stop exercising, you will lose that fitness. And when you start, you will gain it. It is absolutely plastic and natural for it to adapt in that way. And it's just something to keep in mind because I think people think that once they're out of shape, it's just too late. But it is never too late. Within weeks, you would be at a level that someone has been training forever is at. Your body doesn't get much better than what it gets. It takes weeks to get to a great level. And really, unless you're doing something competitively, that's just really where you need to idle forever. So mitochondrial density gets better. And then another change that happens, and if you want to go back and listen to the slide, the lecture on nutrition, where we talk a little bit about how hormones bind onto cell receptors, and that's how the nutrients are brought in to give the cell its energy. And that's the fuel, right? That's the fuel that keeps those energy systems going. So one of the changes that happen over weeks of exercise is that GLUT4, which is in the muscle and fat cells, this is the little transporter that comes up, I'll call it a carrier. It it comes up to the surface of the cell and it picks up the glucose as it's there waiting patiently at the door. And that happens again through the action of insulin. And so one of the things that happen is that the cell gets more sensitive to the insulin. So it's like, oh, there's the insulin. It's waiting for it. It's ready for it. And GLUT4, there's more of them. So now there's more units of GLUT4 in the cell to come get more glucose. And so at the end of the day, a big adaptation is that we become metabolically, we're not at risk for diabetes because we are more sensitive to insulin and we do not have high blood sugar and things like that. So those are the metabolic adaptations. We have more aerobic potential because of those more mitochondria, and our metabolic potential is better because we can bring more glucose in the cell. And we can do that because we're more sensitive to insulin and because we have more GLUT4, which is needed to get it in. It's the carrier. Now, we also have cardiorespiratory adaptations. And cardiorespiratory adaptations are just honestly all again about muscles, adaptation, and growth. You can see the first one, capillaries. So this little sonar thing on here, I'm not sure what that exactly was for, but if you look really close, you can see the capillaries growing and expanding. So that's one of the adaptations that occur over several weeks of cardiovascular or aerobic exercise, is that we grow more blood vessels. It's called angiogenesis, but boom, they take off and that creates more blood flow. We also, you can see that stroke volume and cardiac output, which is the total amount the heart pumps in one systole, one contraction. You can see how much those increase at training levels. And you can also, well, you can't really see this, but the dilation of the blood vessels, we talked again about how the onset, they dilate in the muscle. Well, that happens through the production, or that happens through a chemical called NO2 or nitric oxide. Now, as we adapt to weeks of cardiorespiratory or aerobic exercise, we start producing, or our blood vessels start producing more NO2. And so we're able to dilate better. So within weeks, guys, our heart is pumping out more per beat. Our capillaries have extended themselves to reach more muscles and infiltrate better. And we've developed more chemicals to dilate better in those areas. I mean, it genuinely is a miracle. If I can just wrap that up by saying our body is phenomenal at reacting to the stress of exercise. And it really is not only aerobic exercise. I know we've kind of focused a lot on that, but also in terms of anaerobic exercise or weightlifting. And we'll take a quick peek. Because if you're, if you're following the subject of exercise physiology, you might be asking, well, what kind of exercise is she talking about? Because, we talked about energy systems and intensities. Well, you can kind of see here the adaptations and the types of exercise. Aerobic exercise is really where it's at, guys, in terms of these cardiovascular, metabolic, and muscular changes. You can see that resistance exercise is really important for muscles. And what I don't like about this image, and that it's not up here because it kind of takes away the power of resistance exercise, is it doesn't have anything on here about skeletal vitality and connective tissue vitality, which is when we age. I mean, dude, rolling an ankle, breaking a hip, that's everything. So really this undermines the importance of resistance exercise, but this lesson was more geared on the effects or the responses and adaptations to aerobic exercise, except the hypertrophy part. So that is all I have for the study of exercise physiology. And as I scroll back to the beginning, just to kind of recap, the sample lesson for this was looking at our responses and adaptations to these systems, and we did not touch on thermoregulatory, and we did touch on endocrines because those are hormones, cardiovascular, yep, we got the rest of those. And then one quick thing, because I just can't resist myself, and that's actually where I went back because I forgot, thermoregulatory. This is a rad system. It makes humans unique. We have the most advanced thermoregulatory system out of over 8 million species. And it helped us survive because while all powerful predators are really fatigued and hot during the day, not us. We were out able to sustain the heat of the sun and keep ourselves cool through sweating mechanisms. And maybe if you guys are interested, we'll talk more about that, but I polled you and that didn't seem to be an area we were interested in going, understandably, but it is a cool topic because if you'll notice, dogs, they have a different kind of sweat gland than us. They have more of a kind that smells, where we have more of a kind that just pumps heat because we're like Chevys. Our bodies run like Chevys inside. Okay, that's all. I digress, guys. Thanks for listening.